Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into a place where bones whisper and dust never settles, deep inside a limestone cave off the coast of Sardinia. It's the kind of place that doesn't show up on postcards, but once you're here, you start to notice something strange, something small, trunked, elephant-shaped, but shrunk. A tiny tusk peeks out of the rubble, a kneecap the size of a mango. You crouch down, brushing away centuries of sleep, and there it is, the Sardinian Pygmy elephant, more myth than mammoth, but very, very real. And the first thing you think is, how did this thing ever breathe? Let alone survive an island full of predators and volcanic drama with that baby-sized trunk. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when we're drifting off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in silence. The cave is still and the air is cooler than you expect. Pressed low and ancient, like it's been holding a breath for centuries. Your flashlight trembles slightly as it hits the bones. There's no full skeleton, just enough to hint at something once alive. Something trunked, yes, but comically small. Not a baby. A grown-up with proportions that feel like nature lost a bet. This isn't the kind of elephant you'd find on the African savanna trumpeting across the plains. No, this one wouldn't have reached your shoulder. If you met it on a hiking trail, you'd bend down to pet it only to realize too late that it's a wild animal that could still jab a tusk through your shin if annoyed. The Sardinian Pygmy elephant, Mammuthus Lamarmorai. If your feeling fancy wasn't just short, it was weirdly short. Weird in the way only island animals get. You might be wondering, how did an elephant even end up on a Mediterranean island in the first place? They don't exactly paddle well, and they definitely don't book ferry tickets. But it turns out elephants are the surprisingly decent swimmers. They can float thanks to their massive lungs and paddle along for miles. So, some tens of thousands of years ago, during one of those dreamy Ice Age moments when sea levels dipped, and land bridges flirted with each other, a few mainland elephants swam their way to Sardinia. And then they were stuck. There's something magic and slightly sinister about islands. Cut off from the mainland, evolution goes rogue. Everything shrinks or swells. You've got giant rodents, dwarf hippos, and now pint-sized elephants with teeny tiny trunks that look like someone forgot to finish drawing them. Now you crouch lower, noticing the curled fragment of a tusk dulled by time. A whisper of enamel. You imagine the animal attached to it, thick legs like table stumps. A gentle sway as it walks through underbrush, sniffing the air with a trunk, barely long enough to scratch its own knee. Cute, right? Until you realize this little elephant lived through earthquakes, predators, and eventually, humans. Here's the thing, the trunk might have been adorable, but it may have also been a serious evolutionary gamble. Historians still argue whether its short trunk was a clever adaptation to low vegetation or a sign of some deeper genetic issue caused by island inbreeding. It's like being handed one of those tiny cocktail straws and being told, drink your whole smoothie through this. Still, the pygmy elephants managed. For thousands of years, they munched through ferns, waded through Sardinia's rivers, and left tiny, unmistakable footprints pressed into the mud, many now fossilized into limestone like eternal Polaroids. One of those ancient paths leads away from the cave and loops around what was once a watering hole. You follow it in your mind, soft-footed and curious. The forest back then would have been thick with Mediterranean scrub, the kind that smells like hot rosemary and damp moss. The elephant herd, if you can even call a few scattered cousins a herd, would have stayed close to water. Safety in numbers, even small ones. And that's when you hear the soft snort of imagination. A pygmy elephant sensing your gaze. Its ears flutter like paper fans. It studies you not out of fear, but with the casual boredom of an animal that's seen everything this island has to offer. You blink and the vision fades. Today, you only get scraps, bones behind museum glass, casts of footprints, and in a particularly spooky monastery cave, once explored by an 18th century monk with a passion for fossils, you get the echo of discovery. That monk, Father Manconi, stumbled upon what he thought were the bones of a giant mole, which honestly is the kind of mistake you only make if you've been living in monastic silence too long. It wasn't until the late 1800s that people started piecing it together. The weird bones, the tiny teeth, the compact tusks. It was all part of a long-lost elephant. But you're getting sleepy now, and that's okay. Let the mystery of the miniature trunk hang there like morning mist on the hills of Sardinia. We'll come back to it. There's still a lot to learn about this little traveler, this unlikely relic of a forgotten island world. Let your breathing slow just a bit. The cave is quiet again. You feel a breeze across your cheek, maybe imagined, maybe not. And far away in the darkest part of your mind's forest, you hear the soft tread of something small, tusked, and curious moving through the leaves. You're still in that cave, still surrounded by stone and quiet, and by now your eyes have adjusted enough to notice details you missed. At first, the faint ancient scratches on a slab of limestone, the uneven floor that might have once been trampled smooth by small patient feet, or maybe hooves. Or were they padded? The truth is, we still don't know exactly what the Sardinian pygmy elephant's feet looked like. Scientists debate that too. But one thing we do know, this little guy wasn't alone. Welcome to Sardinia, not today's postcard-perfect version, with yachts and Aperol spritzes, but a strange, ancient version of the island. One filled with animals that look like they came from a fairy tale, or maybe a video game, programmed by someone slightly sleep-deprived. You're wandering through brush that crackles underfoot. It's about 12,000 years ago, give or take a nap. You're surrounded by creatures that all have one thing in common. They're off. Too big, too small, too something. This is what scientists call island syndrome, where evolution throws out the rulebook. To your left, a giant dormouse the size of a house cat doesn't seem afraid of you. Just blinks slowly like it's halfway through a nap it started last week. To your right, a dwarf goat, horns too large for its tiny body eyes, too clever. It's chewing on something that might once have been your flip-flop if time travel weren't imaginary. You take a few careful steps and spot it again, that familiar swaying gait. A pygmy elephant half hidden behind a crooked olive tree. This time it's not alone. There are three more. A family, maybe. One has a notched ear. One's tusks curve in different directions like a melted tuning fork. They don't look scared of you either. Maybe they've never seen a predator like you before. Sardinia was like that. No big predators. No lions. No saber-tooths. Not even wolves. Which meant that animals didn't need to be fast or aggressive or huge. Over time, evolution relaxed its shoulders. Species started downsizing. And for the ancestors of the pygmy elephant mainland mammoths and straight-tusked elephants, it was adapt or die. Historians still argue whether the Sardinian pygmy elephant came from Mammuthus meridionalis or Mammuthus trogontheri. One theory suggests it might have even been a weird offshoot of the African forest elephant. Think of it like trying to reconstruct a family tree, where every leaf is fossilized, scattered across Europe and labeled in 3 languages. The point is, whatever branch this elephant came from, it got here and then got smaller, much smaller. Over generations, something once towering shrank into something barely taller than you on your tiptoes. Why, well, island life plays favorites. With limited food and no predators, smaller bodies are just more efficient. Less food, less water, less overheating in a hot, Mediterranean climate. But not everything shrank at the same rate. That's where things get weird. The elephant's trunk, its most iconic feature, didn't scale down quite right. Imagine resizing a photograph but only shrinking half of it. You end up with a very confused animal. 2 short trunks meant they may have struggled to reach water if it was too deep, or to pluck leaves from higher branches. And while the trunk is mostly soft tissue and doesn't fossilize, the skull gives hints. The nasal opening, much smaller than you'd expect. Less muscle attachment. Scientists think the Sardinian Pygmy elephant's trunk may have resembled more of a long snout than a proper elephant trunk. More anteater than Dumbo. But don't laugh. That stubby trunk still worked. Maybe it wasn't elegant, but it got the job done. Evolution doesn't care about dignity. It only cares about survival. The trees here are smaller too. The grass is coarse, scrubby. Nothing like the sweeping savanna. Food sources are lean. These elephants probably grazed all day just to stay upright. You can imagine them working the hillside, moving slowly side by side. Their ears flapping lazily, not for cooling like their African cousins, but maybe just to swat flies. You pass a grove of gnarled trees, and suddenly you stumble across what must have been a nesting site. Not a nest like a bird's, but a communal space. Scuffed earth, pebbles arranged in a wide curve. You kneel and imagine this is where the calves were born, sheltered, safe. The kind of place a mother pygmy elephant might have stayed for days guarding her young from, well, not much, honestly. Just weather. And time. That's the tragedy and charm of these ancient ecosystems. They were delicate like snow globes, perfect if untouched. But you shake the system just a little and humans change the weather, and things start breaking fast. Still, there was a time when the island was in perfect balance. The pygmy elephants lived not just among the dormice and goats, but alongside huge, flightless birds, chunky lizards, and at least one species of extinct hedgehog that probably looked like a pine cone with attitude. You hear a soft splash nearby. Maybe you've reached a stream. Maybe you're imagining one. Either way, the elephants are here too, drinking carefully one by one, with those small, inefficient trunks that make every sip a delicate ballet of coordination. You sit on a mossy rock and watch. Their eyes are deep-set and strangely human. They look back at you not with fear but with curiosity. You get the feeling you're not the first time-traveling dreamer to end up here. One of the elephants steps forward its feet, pressing softly into the mud. You notice the way the toes splay slightly more like a primitive elephant one that remembers the distant mainland but has grown used to island stillness. The breeze shifts. The elephant snorts. You blink. They're gone. The grove is empty. The stream is dry. The dormouse skitters past like it's late for something. And you're left with a growing sense of wonder. How many other creatures did the island hold? What other forgotten species whispered through these hills? The pygmy elephant was just one piece of a weird, enchanting puzzle. And it wasn't even the strangest. But you're tired now. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the soft sway of imagined elephant feet. Their world is gone. But tonight, it's ours. You're walking now, not in real time, but in the dream version of it, where centuries collapse under each step. The wind hums through a corridor of stone and gnarled brush, and your mind latches onto a question you can't shake. How does something as enormous as an elephant turn into something you could almost leash and walk around the block? The answer lies in two words that sound like science fiction: insular dwarfism. You pause beside a fossilized trackway. Broad, shallow imprints preserved in limestone like nature's forgotten sidewalk. Each step is small, oddly close together but unmistakably elephantine. It's like watching a bulldozer perform ballet. And here's the thing, the footprints didn't get smaller because the elephants started hitting the gym. They got smaller because the island made them. See, when a large animal population becomes isolated on an island, cut off from predators, hemmed in by limited food, and governed by space more than speed, something strange happens. Over many generations, the big ones shrink. It's like evolution's version of portion control. Historians still argue whether insular dwarfism is always beneficial or sometimes just a desperate genetic fluke. But in the case of our Sardinian Pygmy elephants, it clearly worked for a while. What started as mainland mammoths became compact, efficient creatures barely as tall as a basketball player, but perfectly adapted to a slower, quieter life. Imagine this, a full-grown mammoth 10 feet tall, trumpeting across the grassy plains of Europe. Now imagine its grandchild born on Sardinia a few thousand years later, barely taller than a pony, its trunk, stubby its shoulders, narrow its tusks, modest little curves like decorative salad forks. Still elephant, just snack-sized. You trail your fingers across a nearby rock wall, brushing lichen and thyme. There's a gouge where an elephant's tusk once scraped, maybe while rubbing off dried mud or marking territory. It's faint, but it's there, a scratch, a signature, a leftover sigh. So why does the trunk matter so much? Well, in elephants, the trunk is a multi-tool. It's used for breathing, touching, smelling, feeding, greeting, and sometimes even slapping someone who really deserves it. Shrinking the trunk without compromising all those functions is like trying to turn a Swiss Army knife into a toothpick. Sure, it can be done, but it's probably going to lose a few features along the way. And yet, these pygmy elephants made do. They didn't need to reach tall branches. The island's vegetation was low and scrappy. They didn't need to defend themselves much, no lions here. Just the occasional overambitious dormouse. You reach an open clearing. The sun filters through thick canopy, dappling the ground in gold. You picture a small herd here grazing quietly. A calf nuzzles its mother's side, her short trunk lifting and lowering like a dancer rehearsing just one delicate move. It's peaceful, oddly modern. The kind of moment that wouldn't look out of place on a nature documentary until the camera zooms out and you realize that these aren't modern elephants at all. They're ghost relics of a vanished lineage. Creatures that answered evolution's call with a gentle quiet, okay, and slowly faded out. But don't think it all happened smoothly. Evolution might be inevitable, but it's never polite. Shrinking an elephant means more than shorter bones. The entire body has to rewire. Bone density shifts. Joints adjust. Organs change volume. You don't get a pygmy elephant overnight. It takes millennia of subtle tweaks, failures, and genetic lottery tickets. Some calves likely didn't survive. Some might have been born with legs too stubby, tusks too heavy, or trunks too awkward to function. Nature edits by deletion, and still the pygmy elephant persisted. There's a fossilized femur, housed in a Sardinian museum, once mistaken for a young mammoth's leg. Turns out it belonged to an adult pygmy elephant. The mistake was understandable. The bone is short, but thick, sturdy, as if the animal had been built, not for speed, but for enduring. Probably helpful given Sardinia's hilly terrain and occasional volcanic fits. Yes, volcanic. We'll get to that in a bit. For now, let your mind settle on the image of these creatures moving slowly through Mediterranean scrub. They don't stampede, they plod, methodical, patient, ancient. There's something almost wise about it. A breeze tugs your sleeve. Or maybe it's the sensation of time passing 1,000 years in a blink. Back then, the world moved differently. There were no clocks, no cities, no fences, just cycles of sun and shadow migration and rest. The pygmy elephants fit that rhythm perfectly. You sit under a twisted juniper tree, brushing your fingers over a pebble that may or may not have sat under an elephant's foot. The ground feels warm, familiar. You close your eyes and imagine the sounds, soft footfalls, the rustle of grass, the occasional sniff-snort of a trunk trying to decide whether that fern smells edible. You're not alone in your curiosity. Paleontologists have spent over a century trying to decode the pygmy elephant puzzle. From fragments of skull to isolated molars, each new discovery adds a brushstroke to the portrait. But the trunk that remains elusive because soft tissue doesn't fossilize. All we get are clues, whispers in bone. One fringe theory suggests that the elephant's trunk might have split into two smaller lobes like pincers to compensate for reduced length. Another theory, wildly debated, claims they might have used their front limbs more like prehistoric pandas, bringing food closer to the mouth instead of relying on trunk reach. There's no firm consensus, just the fun of arguing over long extinct noses. You smile. It's okay to drift a little now. Let the theories swirl and fade. Let the weight of time press gently on your chest, not in fear, but in wonder. The pygmy elephant was never meant to be understood completely. Some stories are better left a little blurry, like a dream you almost remember, or a shadow you thought you saw moving just beyond the cave wall. Let the quiet settle in. Let the island exhale. You're walking through history, and the footprints are still warm. You're back in motion, mentally at least. Wandering across a dusty hillside, dotted with stunted shrubs, and the occasional sun-bleached stone. It's early morning in the Ice Age, and the light stretches long across the ground. There's a stillness here, but not the kind that says nothing's happening more, like everything's just slow. You spot it again. The pygmy elephant. Not alone this time. It's with three others. One lags behind, slightly perhaps older, its back a little more hunched. The smallest of the group, maybe a juvenile, scurries ahead with a kind of awkward excitement trunk wagging like a stubby metronome. You can't help but feel charmed. It's like watching a golden retriever wearing dress shoes, determined but out of sync with its own parts. Here's a funny thing about evolution, sometimes it's about compromise. These pygmy elephants weren't just smaller because they could be. They were smaller because island life demanded it. With fewer calories to go around, less space to roam, and no predators chasing them, the usual mammoth-sized blueprints were tossed out. But shrinking doesn't mean downgrading. These were still elephants. And when you look closer, you realize how odd that made them. Imagine being the smallest elephant in a world full of rodents, the size of badgers and birds that couldn't fly but could run straight through you if they wanted. You're not the king of the island jungle. You're just another animal trying not to trip over your own too short trunk. Historians still argue whether these pygmy elephants lived in tight family units like their larger cousins or were more solitary. like moody introverts with tusks. Some fossil sites suggest herding behavior bones found in small clusters, possibly family groups. Others hint at loners, wandering the hills in quiet contemplation. Either way, there's a pattern in the bones wear and tear arthritis injuries that healed. These elephants lived full lives, long ones even. You find yourself trailing behind them, now your imaginary herd. They're crossing a low ridge and one pauses to rub against a fallen tree trunk. The bark strips away, leaving a polished groove. Maybe they did this often. Maybe that tree was the local spa. And then you notice something else. They're not walking in a straight line. Their paths weave, loop. Sometimes they double back. You follow the winding trail and realize this isn't just a route, it's memory. These creatures return to the same spots again and again, for food, for water, maybe even for rest. That's not just speculation. Modern elephants do it. They remember routes, water sources, even where loved ones fell. And while the pygmy version had a smaller brain proportionally, it was still built for memory. You picture it now, those little feet padding through the same ancient clearing generation after generation. A quiet ritual no one witnessed until now. You sit in that clearing and look around. No fences, no signs, just wind and birds and the faint rustle of leaves. This would have been prime grazing territory, low plants, soft soil, easy water access. You can almost hear the gentle pull of grass from the earth. The occasional low rumble of elephant talk, a sound so deep, you feel it in your chest more than hear it. And here's a strange, delightful fact, their trunks, small though they were, probably still made a lot of noise. Elephant vocal cords are famously versatile. From rumbles to trumpets, they have a full soundboard of expressions. Some researchers speculate that even these pygmy elephants might have had squeaky trumpets, tiny but mighty, like blowing into a kazoo inside a church. Both hilarious and oddly moving. You rest your chin in your hands and think, how did they see the world? With those big, thoughtful eyes. With a nose that didn't quite do what its ancestors did. With a pace slow enough to notice every change in the wind. You can't help but smile at the thought of a pygmy elephant reacting to a storm. Probably tucking under a tree trunk, lifted to sniff the sky, feet braced like tiny anchors. Or maybe they loved the rain. Maybe it made the plants sweeter, the ground softer. Theories swirl around these animals, but facts are few. Fossils tell us where and roughly when, but not how it felt to be one of them. Were they playful? Were they cautious? Did they mourn? We do know this they endured. Through climate shifts, through volcanic ash falls, through food shortages. Their bones show signs of adaptation, dense joints that resisted breaking tusks, that curved compactly for maneuvering tight spaces, skulls shaped just right for a downsized brain that still got the job done. They weren't leftovers. They were specialists. Island survival requires finesse, not force. You don't outfight the environment, you outlast it. The pygmy elephant was a master of this quiet persistence. For over 300,000 years, it made Sardinia its home. But it wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, at least until the very end. You hear a rustle behind you and turn. Nothing there. Just a shadow maybe, a breeze, or a memory. And somewhere in the brush, you imagine a juvenile pygmy elephant pausing mid-step, eyes locking with yours for the briefest moment. Then it turns and disappears into the undergrowth. Let it go. Let yourself drift with the herd, one footstep behind them, light as a whisper. These aren't ghosts. Not quite. Just stories you can still walk beside if you move slow enough. The trail is fading. Not vanishing, just softening like an old dream. You follow it anyway down into a shallow valley carved by time and trickles of forgotten rain. And here, pressed into the limestone floor like signatures at the end of an ancient letter, are footprints. Not modern, not even medieval. These tracks are tens of thousands of years old, made when the earth was softer, and the Sardinian Pygmy elephant was still very much alive. They're small, round, gently spaced. The steps of a creature that wasn't in a rush. You crouch beside one, tracing the rim of the indentation with your fingertip. There's no sound but the breeze and your own breath. This valley, now mostly dry and overgrown, was once a watering hole. A vital pit stop in a landscape that didn't always play nice. Sardinia back then was hotter, drier, and moody. Seasonal droughts swept across the land. What water there was would have collected in low basins. Like this, pools ringed with trampled mud and thick with the scent of animals. You imagine it still and shimmering. The midday sun glinting off the surface. And then the soft arrival of elephants, your little herd. Again trunk tips, twitching feet, sinking into the mud like cautious stamps. One steps forward, dips its short trunk and drinks. Here's the curious thing about that: a full-sized elephant drinks by drawing water through its trunk, then shooting it into its mouth like a furry 8-foot-long straw. But what if your trunk is, well, not up to the job? That's what scientists still debate about these pygmy elephants. Their trunks may have been too short or underdeveloped to perform the usual scoop and sip. So maybe they had to kneel slightly. Or lower their faces all the way to the surface. Or maybe, just maybe, they slurped. It's not the most majestic image, but survival rarely is. And let's be honest, you've definitely done weirder things for hydration during a road trip. This watering hole was more than just a place to drink. It was a hub, a crossroads, and like any good hangout spot, it had a lot of foot traffic. You take a mental step back, looking beyond the elephant prints. There, something different. Smaller, four-toed. A rodent, no more likely a type of extinct deer. And over there, a three-clawed scratch in the stone, possibly left by a giant flightless bird, trying to edge in on the buffet line. And right near the edge of the water, a deeper indentation, almost a wallow. You picture an elephant calf flopping into the mud with an undignified thwomp rolling back and forth while its exasperated mother tries to pull it out with that inadequate trunk. It's funny, right? But it also tells you something. This was a family site. Generational. The kind of place creatures return to over and over, following instinct and memory like a built-in GPS. Now, here's a bit of delightful science. Some of these prints, still preserved in Sardinian caves and riverbeds, were first mistaken for something else entirely. Dinosaurs at one point. Then, oversized tortoises. It took decades before researchers realized they were looking at elephant tracks, just not the kind they expected. Historians still argue whether certain tracks found deeper inland belong to the pygmy species or to an earlier, slightly larger population. Maybe a transitional form, maybe cousins, maybe just tall tales carved in stone. But what's clear is this: these elephants had range. They weren't confined to one corner of the island. They explored, moved with the seasons, left their mark literally. You lean back and stare up at the sky, imagining those long ago days when the Sardinian sun beat down on a moving herd, their shadows long and wobbly across the cracked ground. Maybe they trumpeted to each other. Maybe they didn't. Maybe their voices were lower, softer, like a hum felt in the soles of your feet. There's something soothing about that image, something restful. The idea of a creature that lives slowly, deliberately, Without urgency, without noise, just step by step, moment by moment. Like nature's version of deep breathing, a pygmy elephant ambles into view just in your mind now. Its ears twitch lazily. It looks around, trunk bobbing like a question mark, and lowers its head for another drink. You can see the muscles work beneath the skin, thin, shaggy gray-brown. The sun warms its back. Its eyes close. Nearby, a younger one tries to mimic it, bending down too far, wobbling on its stubby knees, nearly tipping over. The older elephant snorts, nudges it back upright. It's a small moment, a quiet one, but it feels like a scene from a bedtime story no one ever got to finish. You blink and they're gone again, just footprints now, echoes pressed into ancient stone. Back in the real world, those tracks are still being studied. Laser scans, 3D models, researchers using software to calculate gait and speed. They want to know how fast did they walk? Did they limp? Did they travel alone or in lines? One recent study even suggested that the pygmy elephants may have used the same trails for generations, paths worn deep by repetition. If true, that would make these trails some of the oldest roads in Europe. Not built by humans but by memory. You step back from the prints and smile. They're just hollows in stone. But they're also proof of life, of habit, of presence. You don't need a whole skeleton to understand that something lived. Sometimes a footprint is enough. Let yourself settle now. Your feet are tired. Your mind is full. Let the sound of water lapping at the edge of a memory fill your ears. Let the image of a quiet herd, moving through golden light, carry you forward. They may be gone, but the path remains. The air shifts, slightly warmer now, a breeze, like breath against your skin. You're still following those prints in the dust, but they begin to veer off toward the edge of a dried-up marsh. The ground here is cracked and spongy, a place that might have once offered water safety, and something even more vital, shade. And as you trail behind your imagined herd, a strange thought flickers through your mind. What if their trunks were more trouble than help? Yes. Tonight, we face it, this adorable, awkward little trunk might not have been a charming feature at all. It might have been a design flaw, a lingering relic from a body that once needed it, now awkwardly adapted to a body that didn't. Let's be clear, trunks are miracles of biological engineering. Over 40,000 muscles, 2 finger-like extensions at the tip, capable of picking up a single blade of grass and uprooting a tree. But only when fully developed. Now imagine trying to do all of that with a trunk that stops halfway, like trying to use a tape measure with only one number on it. Historians still argue whether the pygmy elephant's trunk was just proportionally small or functionally compromised. The shape of the skull suggests a much shorter nasal passage, which implies fewer muscles, less reach, and maybe, just maybe, a very different lifestyle. You crouch in the shade of a boulder. Picturing it now, the elephant reaches for a branch, misses, bobs its head like a confused marionette, then tries again, leaning in, with its whole body to compensate. It gets there eventually, but not gracefully. So why keep the trunk at all? Why didn't evolution just remove it? Because that's not how nature works. Traits don't vanish overnight. They shrink, adapt, linger like old habits. The pygmy elephant's trunk may have been a legacy, no longer ideal but not quite useless either. Kind of like keeping a landline just in case. You move through the brush, low and golden in the late daylight. The pygmy elephants are still here just ahead, foraging in the undergrowth. You notice how they seem to favor lower shrubs, Mossy patches roots they can dig out with their feet. Maybe their trunks weren't ideal for foraging, so they adapted their habits instead. Less browsing, more grazing. There's even a theory, one of those fringe ideas that makes scientists roll their eyes but secretly wonder, suggesting the pygmy elephants might have used their short trunks more like snouts nudging food rather than grabbing it. Sort of like a vacuum cleaner with personality. And if you're wondering, yes, scientists have tried to model what that would look like. One team in Italy even used AI to digitally reconstruct facial musculature based on skull dimensions. The result, a surprisingly expressive elephant face, with a nose that looked more piglet than pachyderm. Still, those little trunks did the job. They had to. Because Sardinia wasn't exactly handing out free meals. Food was limited and the terrain unforgiving. If you couldn't figure out how to eat, you didn't last long. That's why the watering holes were so important. Less about luxury, more about survival. Not just water, but the kind of vegetation that gathered around moisture. Soft, low, easier to manage with a stubby trunk. You notice something new now. Scrapes on the bark of a half-dead tree. Marks about waist-high. Not clawed, not chewed. More like rubbed. You press your palm against one and imagine it an elephant using the tree like a back scratcher or maybe even a message board. Animals do that, leave behind scent, posture, intention. You're standing in what might have been a communication hub, a place where a pygmy elephant could say in its own silent way, "I was here." Elephants, even small ones, are famously social. They form bonds, remember each other for years, mourn the dead, travel long distances to visit old places, even old bones. Modern elephants do this all the time. So it's not a stretch to believe the pygmy versions shared some of that instinct and that their awkward little trunks, despite their flaws, were still instruments of emotion. Stroking, nudging, touching. You crouch beside a shallow groove in the ground, an impression just large enough to cradle a sleeping elephant calf. You imagine the mother nearby her trunk, curled protectively, her ears flicking at flies, and the calf breathing softly, oblivious to how precarious life on this island really was. Because while the trunk was manageable, it wasn't perfect. And when things got hard, when the rains didn't come, when the brush grew tough, when competition rose, the pygmy elephants couldn't adapt as quickly as they once did. Let's not pretend otherwise. Their cute, stunted trunks were probably part of their undoing. Not the only reason, of course, but one of many little cracks in their survival armor. You sigh, sinking into the grass. The sun is low now, casting everything in soft orange light. You can almost hear it, the low, barely there sound of trunks rustling through brush. Not majestic, not booming, just gentle, like breathing. There's something sad and beautiful about a creature perfectly suited for yesterday, still trying to make sense of today. That's what the pygmy elephants were. Survivors, strugglers, a little bit silly, a lot bit stubborn, and you love them for it. Let yourself rest here just a while. Feel the warmth against your arms, the whisper of wind against your face. Imagine the tickle of a tiny trunk, brushing past, testing your scent. You don't need to understand every detail. Just remember this moment. The morning returns, slow and pale, draped in that thin fog only island hills know how to wear. You blink and the light softens everything. Trees, rocks, even memory. You're still on the trail, still shadowing those little elephants. Still trying to answer the question no one can fully pin down. When did it all start to go wrong? You've seen the bones. You've imagined the herd. You've studied the trunk. But now something new arrives on the island, and it doesn't have fur or tusks or clumsy feet. It has fire. It has tools. It has plans. You've guessed it. Humans have just entered the chat. Sardinia was late to the party. The island remained isolated far longer than much of Europe. But eventually, human settlers arrived. Maybe by boat, maybe by accident, maybe by necessity. And like any newcomers with opposable thumbs, they brought change. Not all at once. At first, the pygmy elephants probably just watched from a distance. Small herds clustered at the edge of the forest, blinking at strange upright animals who made noise and smelled of smoke. The elephants had never seen anything like them before. And that was the problem. Because elephants, like most animals, learn how to avoid danger through experience. But if you've never seen a predator before, you don't have a file for it. No alarm bells. No instinct to flee. So maybe the first time a human stepped toward a pygmy elephant with a spear, it didn't run. Historians still argue whether early human hunting played a major role in their extinction, or if climate changes were the bigger culprit. But bones bearing cut marks, clean, intentional slices left by flint tools tell part of the story. The pygmy elephants weren't just dying off. They were being used. Not just for food, but possibly for tools, shelter, maybe even ritual. You move quietly now through the scene. A narrow trail where once elephants trod. At the edge of a clearing, ash mixed with bone. A hearth, a campsite. The signs are faint, but they're there. Charcoal streaks on stone. Burnt bone. A cracked molar tossed aside. And suddenly the silence feels different. Less peaceful, more interrupted. You glance toward the trees. Are the elephants still out there maybe? But fewer now. Warier. Maybe they've retreated farther into the hills, where human firelight can't reach. Here's where it gets tricky. Unlike some mainland megafauna, the woolly mammoth, the giant sloth, the Sardinian pygmy elephant never coexisted long with humans. There's little overlap in the fossil record. Just a blink, really. A hint that they tried to share space and failed. There's even a theory, granted, whispered mostly in the quieter corners of academia, that the arrival of humans disrupted not just the elephants' numbers, but their culture. Because yes, elephants have culture. Migratory patterns, social rituals, generational memory. Disrupt that rhythm, and you're not just taking a life, you're severing a timeline. You sit now on a ridge overlooking the basin below. This might have been the last good grazing ground. Looser, cooler, harder to reach. The kind of place a dwindling population might retreat to when things start to feel wrong. There's a light scraping sound to your left. A stone knife. A flint being shaped. You glance and see only trees. But the feeling lingers. Let's be fair, the humans weren't villains. They were survivors too. Sardinia was tough, rocky, steep, unpredictable. A pygmy elephant might have looked like a walking miracle. All that meat, all those bones, all that memory tucked into muscle and fur. You can't blame the people for seeing opportunity, but still, you feel the weight of it. The slow erasure. The watering holes begin to dry up. The trails fade. The bark-rubbed trees remain untouched. And in the deep caves, the bones start to pile, one by one. You run your fingers along the edge of a tusk fragment half buried in the dirt. It's warm from the sun, but brittle. You could snap it with a little pressure. You don't. You just see it and think. Imagine the final herd, maybe just a mother and calf. Maybe a trio of stragglers. They move through the hills in silence, avoiding smoke, listening for footsteps that don't belong. The calf's trunk is barely long enough to swat flies, but it still tries, still learns. And one day they stop appearing. No bones with fresh breakage. No more tracks. No more low, sleepy rumbles in the grass. Just absence. You press your hand to the earth as if trying to feel some echo of vibration. But there's nothing. And that's how most extinctions happen. Not with fire and screaming and thunder, but with silence. Stillness. No more footsteps. Just wind and dust. You stay a little longer, eyes closed, imagining the elephants are still out there somewhere just hidden. Watching, waiting, but you know better. They're gone, but they were here. And for a time, they ruled this island not with power, but with patience. Not with strength, but with stillness. That's something worth remembering. So let yourself be quiet now. Let the images soften. Let the fire fade. Let the path disappear beneath leaves and time. The elephants are gone, but tonight they walk with you. You're walking again, but this time it's not through brush or beside a drying stream. You're descending. Down stone steps carved not by nature but by monks. The air grows colder. The light dimmer. And before long you're inside a cave, not a wild one, but a sacred one. It smells like damp stone candle wax and a little bit of mystery. Welcome to Grotta di Nettuno, Neptune's cave, or one of the many like it scattered across Sardinia. But this one has something special bones. Piles of them. Stashed away in the darker corners. Tucked behind slabs of stalactite unearthed by accident. And the first person to see them, not a scientist, not an explorer, but a monk. This isn't a legend. In the 1700s, a Sardinian monk, Father Manconi, wandered into a cave and found something he didn't expect, massive bones that didn't match anything he'd ever studied. Too big for sheep. Too weird for cattle. Too ancient. He did what monks do, took notes, sketched poorly, and prayed. Then he stored them away like holy relics. For decades they sat collecting dust, occasionally brought out to impress visiting noblemen or curious priests. Some thought they were the remains of dragons. Others suggested they were the bones of early Christian giants, smitten by divine wrath. Historians still argue whether the original bones were ever properly catalogued, or if they were lost in one of many cave floods that periodically sweep Sardinia's limestone pockets. But eventually word got out. And in the mid-1800s, European scientists began sniffing around. They weren't here for prayer. They were here for fossils. You picture one now, long-beard, ridiculous hat, poking at a dusty bone with a brass-tipped cane. He lifts it into the light and frowns. It's not quite right. Not big enough for a mammoth. Not shaped like anything modern. The teeth are strange, rounded, worn down in places that suggest grazing, not chewing. What is this, he mutters. You lean in from your imaginary corner and whisper, a pygmy elephant. But it would take years before anyone fully understood what they were looking at. The fossils were fragmentary, out of context. There was no full skeleton to lay out. Just bits and pieces, molars here, a jawbone there, a tusk, the length of a rolling pin. And let's be honest, when you find elephant-sized teeth on a Mediterranean island, your first thought isn't, ah yes, insular dwarfism at work. It's more like, did someone misplace a zoo animal? One of the first scientists to propose a name was Filippo Lissoni, an Italian paleontologist who noted the unique structure of the molars and postcranial bones. But the species wasn't officially described until much later, when the name Mammuthus Lamarmorai was coined after Alberto Lamarmora, a Sardinian naturalist and explorer who never met the elephant, but probably would have been thrilled to have his name on it. And here's a fun detail, the species name Lamarmorai is often mispronounced even by experts, which is a poetic kind of justice for a creature no one quite understands. In the corner of the cave museum, you spot a dusty display case. Inside a partial skull, a model reconstruction, and a caption that reads, Sardinian Pygmy Elephant Island Giant Miniature Mystery. You smile, because while the bones are real, most of what we know about this creature is stitched together. Hypothesis and hope. A puzzle where half the pieces have been chewed by time. Paleontologists use whatever they can. CT scans, 3D modeling, comparisons with known relatives, like the dwarf elephants of Sicily and Cyprus. And always, they return to that question. How did it get here? The swimming theory still holds. Elephants are surprisingly buoyant and can paddle for miles. During glacial periods, sea levels were lower, and Sardinia would have been closer to the mainland. A few brave or confused elephants may have swum across, or walked part way, then swam the rest. The journey must have been grueling. Cold water, strong currents, no GPS. But they made it. And once here, they stayed. And shrank. You walk past the museum display and find yourself drawn to a little side room. It's quiet, dusty. And in the center, on a cracked slab of stone, is the first molar ever found by Father Manconi. Still chipped, still stained with centuries of cave drip, but beautiful in its own prehistoric way. You crouch and study it. Not much to look at, honestly. You'd probably mistake it for a chunk of coral if it showed up in your garden. But this little tooth has unlocked entire histories. From it, scientists learned about diet. Wear patterns suggest tough vegetation grasses bark roots. From the root structure, they estimated the elephant size. From the curvature, they guessed age. It's all extrapolation. But it adds up. Piece by piece, the story emerges. You glance back toward the cave exit. It's brighter now. The sun is returning. And you realize something: these bones, though ancient, are the last physical link we have to a creature that once ruled Sardinia. Not with grandeur, but with quiet presence. A species built for endurance, for adaptation, for staying small when the world demanded it. Let your thoughts slow as you walk back toward the light, past the display cases, past the stone steps, up into the wind and sun and the sound of birds calling from olive trees. You look over your shoulder once, just once, and imagine a pygmy elephant standing at the cave mouth, eyes, thoughtful trunk, twitching, watching you go. You nod. It doesn't follow. It never needed to. The path outside the cave widens upward, through a hillside, patched with stubborn grass and wind-polished stone. As you climb, the sun climbs too slow, steady and ancient, just like the story you're still unraveling. By now, you've walked beside the pygmy elephants long enough to care, long enough to want answers. So let's get to the part that brings every paleontologist to their knees. In awe and frustration, the teeth. Yes, the teeth. Because if there's one thing the fossil record loves to keep, it's teeth. And for good reason. They're tough, denser than bone. Like nature's time capsules, they survive floods, pressure, and the occasional clumsy excavation student. And when it comes to the Sardinian pygmy elephant, the teeth are where this story really sinks in. You arrive at a small clearing. In front of you, a folding table with trays of molars laid out like ancient pastries. Some smooth, some chipped, all of them weird. Why weird? Because pygmy elephant teeth are like their own language, one you can almost read if you know what to look for. Modern elephants have complex molars designed for grinding down fibrous plant material. Think ridges, grooves, and wave-like chewing surfaces. But the Sardinian pygmy's molars, they're stubbier, fewer ridges, more rounded. As if evolution gave up halfway through the carving. Historians still argue Whether this was due to dietary change or simply a side effect of dwarfism. But either way, these teeth tell us something strange was going on. You pick one up carefully. It's surprisingly heavy for its size. You turn it in your hands and try to imagine the jaw it once sat inside. Not a massive roaring beast, but a gentle, patient grazer. A creature that spent most of its day chewing, slowly, carefully, because calories were hard to come by and digestion was everything. Now, here's where things get juicy in a dry, academic sort of way. In the early 20th century, a team of Italian paleontologists recovered a nearly complete pygmy elephant molar from a collapsed rock shelter near Alghero. The find caused a stir, not because it was large, but because it was too small. Some thought it was from a juvenile. Others insisted it was fully grown. One eccentric German researcher even declared it a hoax, the result of an elephant and a goat falling in love. He wrote only half joking. But the real answer came later when a second molar was found nearby, identical in shape, but slightly more worn, adult, confirmed. That's when the theory solidified this wasn't a baby mammoth. It wasn't malformed, it was a whole species, and it had evolved that way, small, sturdy, and slightly odd. You let your hand hover over the other specimens. One has a cracked root. Another is stained ochre, likely from iron-rich soil. Each tells a story, and not just about diet or age. Teeth wear down in patterns. Sideways wear suggests side chewing. Flat wear indicates a grinding motion. The Sardinian Pygmy elephant's molars suggest a preference for low, tough vegetation, grass bark, maybe even salt-tolerant scrub. You sit on a nearby stone, letting the warm sun soak into your back. Around you, wine sighs through the low bushes, carrying the scent of thyme and old soil. You imagine an elephant, no taller than a mule, shuffling up this very slope. It stops, reaches down with its stubby trunk, grabs a mouthful of dry moss, chews for 10 minutes, then does it again. Simple, right? But in that simplicity, survival. Now, here's a delightful fringe theory, whispered over wine at paleontology conferences but rarely published. Some researchers believe the pygmy elephant had an irregular molar replacement cycle. You see, modern elephants go through 6 sets of molars in a lifetime, replacing them from back to front like a slow-moving dental conveyor belt. But what if in shrinking, the pygmy elephant's jaw couldn't accommodate this full system? What if it only had 4 sets? Or worse, what if the molars wore down before replacements were ready? That would mean periods of semi-starvation, relying on partially worn teeth, soft foods, or desperation grazing. Not ideal. And certainly not sustainable in a tough climate. You don't need a predator to go extinct. You just need bad teeth and a dry season. You glance up. The hills stretch toward the horizon, ancient and quiet. Somewhere out there beneath layers of soil and ash, more molars wait. More fragments of jaw. More whispers of a vanished creature that once chewed its way through life with quiet dignity. The sun is brighter now. Time to move. As you stand, you imagine an archaeologist, 300 years from now, unearthing your dental records and trying to piece together your diet. 1 cappuccino too many probably. Too many soft snacks. But for the pygmy elephant, every tooth mattered. Each one a tool, a map, a memory. You walk downhill slowly, letting gravity carry you, letting the weight of what you've learned settle into your bones. This isn't just a story of extinction. It's a story of chewing, of wear and tear, of survival worn smooth by time. And as your steps grow softer, and the hillside flattens into shadow, you realize something simple and profound. In the end, even giants are remembered by the smallest things. Like teeth, you're not walking now, you're floating. Not literally, of course. But mentally, you're suspended in time, drifting between stone and silence, between knowledge and guesswork. You followed the pygmy elephant through forests, caves, and watering holes. You've examined its bones and puzzled over its teeth. But one thing remains: its name. Mammuthus Lamarmorai. The name rolls strangely on your tongue. Formal, Latin, just mysterious enough to make you feel like you should whisper it. And yet, it's a name born from the very human desire to put things in boxes, to name what we fear forgetting. You're standing now in a quiet museum gallery. High ceilings, dry air glass cases. In the center, a reconstructed skeleton. Not a real one, there's never been a full fossil found. Just casts. Recreations. Bones from several individuals, stitched together like a prehistoric Franken elephant. It's smaller than you expect, even though you've been hearing that word pygmy over and over. But to see it upright shoulders just above chest height, with tusks barely poking forward like misplaced commas, it's different. Realer. Sadder somehow. A nearby plaque tells you what you already know: this is Mammuthus Lamarmorai, the Sardinian Pygmy elephant, discovered in pieces, reassembled in hope. First described in 1883 based on isolated teeth and jawbones found near Alghero. But here's the twist: despite being discovered, the elephant had likely already been extinct for thousands of years. The bones were ancient even then, fossilized memories trapped in limestone. By the time science caught up, the story had already ended. Historians still argue whether we found it too late to learn anything truly meaningful. Some claim the fossil record is too patchy. Others believe we've barely scratched the surface, literally. Dozens of Sardinian caves remain unexcavated, and every few years a new bone appears. A vertebra, a tusk, a molar with a different wear pattern. It's like the elephant is still trying to talk. You circle the skeleton. Its spine arches gently as though it's still moving. The ribs flare delicately. The feet, cast from real fossil impressions, look like awkward stone pancakes. But it's the skull that holds you. The nasal opening is smaller than it should be. No trunk preserved, of course. Just an empty socket where breath once began. And suddenly you're imagining it breathing again. Quietly. Softly. Like it's still trying to understand you as much as you're trying to understand it. The name Mammuthus Lamarmorai honors Alberto Lamarmora, a 19th century naturalist and explorer who spent years cataloging Sardinia's geology and flora. He never met the pygmy elephant in life or death, but he walked the same hills, touched the same soil, probably stood in the same caves. He believed the island was full of secrets. He wasn't wrong. You take a step back and let the skeleton blur a little. You don't need sharp lines to feel the presence. This was an animal, not an idea, not a theory. It walked, slept, grew old. It lived through volcanic ashfalls, seasonal droughts, and the first flickers of human campfires. And then quietly, it stopped. There's no mass extinction event associated with Mammuthus Lamarmorai. No asteroid, no flood. Just a quiet disappearance, sometime between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago. And what did it leave behind? A handful of bones, some broken teeth, a few jokes about pocket-sized mammoths, and a lot of questions. Like, why did it go extinct? Sure, humans probably didn't help. But the climate was shifting too. Sardinia was getting hotter, drier. Vegetation changed. Water sources dried up. And those little elephants already struggling with short trunks, tough teeth, and limited grazing land couldn't keep up. You glance around the museum. A school group shuffles past, chattering quietly. None of them really notice the skeleton. It just looks like another prehistoric oddity. A relic. A sideshow. But you know better now. You know this elephant once swayed through groves of cork trees and juniper, once pressed tiny footprints into clay paths, worn smooth by generations. You know its bones were discovered by accident, mistaken for dragons and giants, then pieced together by scientists with more questions than answers. And you know its story didn't end when it died. It ends with you, right here, right now, listening, remembering. Because in the end, extinction isn't just a biological event, it's a forgetting. And to remember to really remember is to let the creature live again, even if just in imagination. You place your hand gently on the glass case. Behind it, a reconstructed tusk curves forward, not menacingly, but with curiosity. Like it wants to ask you something. Like it wants to be understood. You close your eyes and try to hear it. The whisper of dry grass underfoot. The steady breath of something trunked and patient. The sound of a name, long and strange, echoing through time. Mammuthus Lamarmorai, small, gentle, gone, but not forgotten. You leave the museum behind, but something follows you. Not in the creepy way, just in the quiet tug at the back of your mind way. A question that refuses to stay buried with the bones. What made that little trunk so different? And why does it matter so much? It's late afternoon now. The light has turned golden, slanting through the hills, like honey through fingers. You find a bench, or maybe it's just a warm, flat rock, and settle there, the kind of settling that makes your whole body sigh. You've been thinking about this for a while, that stunted trunk. Not exactly a deal breaker for a species, but definitely inconvenient. It's like designing a sports car and forgetting the steering wheel. See, for a normal elephant, the trunk is everything. It's a nose hand, straw snorkel, and social tool all rolled into one floppy noodle-like miracle. Elephants use it to communicate, comfort, eat, drink, smell, even paint in captivity anyway. But for the Sardinian Pygmy elephant, the trunk appears to have been trimmed back, less versatile, less muscular, less expressive. Historians still argue whether this reduction was a direct result of insular dwarfism or a separate evolutionary quirk. Some scientists point to the small size of the nasal cavity, suggesting the trunk could only grow so long without crowding the skull. Others argue that the island's low, scrubby vegetation eliminated the need for a long-reaching nose. Why grab a branch overhead when everything you need is practically on the floor? But then there's the deeper question. If the trunk wasn't pulling its weight, how did these elephants compensate? You squint out across the hills and picture one now, bending awkwardly at the knees, lowering its head directly to the grass, like a reluctant yoga student. It's not elegant, but it works. There's even a theory based on wear patterns on skulls and tusks that these elephants use their mouths more like grazing horses, lips and teeth taking on the work normally delegated to the trunk. A role swap, an improvisation. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some reconstructions show their trunks ending, not in two fingers like modern elephants, but in a single nub. One paleontologist described it as closer to a sock puppet than a snorkel. Not exactly flattering, but undeniably vivid. It raises an odd image, an elephant attempting to pick up a pebble and just kind of nudging it around, frustrated. Or maybe it didn't need to pick things up at all. Maybe its world was already arranged perfectly for a short-trunked lifestyle. That's the charm and the tragedy of island evolution. It makes everything just enough to survive until the world changes again. You let your thoughts drift to modern elephants. The way they wrap trunks around each other. The way they stroke their young. Imagine trying to do that with a trunk that barely reaches your neighbor. Would pygmy elephants have been less affectionate? Less tactile? Or did they develop new ways to show it? You imagine a mother pressing her head against her calf. A sideways lean. A hip nudge. Something physical. Warm. Quiet. Communication without trumpets. Pygmy elephants likely had smaller social groups, too. Fewer resources meant fewer family members. So maybe their emotional bonds were tighter, more intense, or maybe their solitude was greater. Here's something else to chew on. Modern elephant trunks are deeply expressive. They twitch, curl, rise, with alarm or excitement. They're full of mood. But if the pygmy trunk lacked that range of motion, how much did that affect its emotional vocabulary? Did the other animals understand it? Did the other elephants? You're not sure, no one is. Because as always, soft tissue doesn't fossilize. We can reconstruct bones, model skulls, analyze teeth, but trunks, they're ghost parts. You have to guess. And every guess says more about us than about them. One fringe theory, charming but completely unconfirmed, suggests that the pygmy elephants might have evolved to rely more on vocalizations and foot vibrations like their modern cousins, but at a much higher frequency due to their smaller size. Think of it as the soprano elephant theory. Hilarious to imagine, but not impossible. Some animals do communicate in frequencies we can't hear. Maybe they hummed. Maybe they buzzed. Maybe you could have stood beside one and felt the message before you heard it. You close your eyes and imagine a whole conversation happening in a field, invisible to the ears, pulsing through the ground. And all because a trunk couldn't quite reach. That's the secret, isn't it? Evolution doesn't give you what's best. It gives you what works right now. And when the right now changes, climate dries up, humans arrive, food vanishes suddenly, all your neat little adaptations turn into liabilities. That short trunk, once a clever efficiency, becomes a problem. You can't reach the last low-lying fruit. You can't draw enough water from the shrinking pool. You can't teach your calf how to comfort others with a gesture you can no longer make. It's subtle, slow, a quiet unwinding. You open your eyes. The light is fading. Shadows stretch long and soft across the hillside. The rock beneath you is warm but cooling. You think about that little trunk, so small, so strange, so important, and realize it's not just anatomy, it's memory. It's the detail that sticks, the one that makes this animal feel real. And maybe when everything else has faded, that's what will remain, the image of a pygmy elephant. Standing alone in the dust trunk, curled like a question mark, listening for answers no one is left to give. The night is coming on now, slow, silvery, quiet. Sardinia's sky unfolds like a velvet curtain dusted with stars, and for a moment the whole island feels like it's holding its breath. You're still wandering, but your path leads somewhere softer to the question of what they ate. A simple need, really. Just food. But food decides everything: behavior, migration, health, even extinction. You settle beneath a low, ancient tree. The bark rough beneath your hand, and let your mind drift back again tens of thousands of years to a moment where the only menu was what grew out of rocks and dirt. The Sardinian pygmy elephant wasn't spoiled for choice. No lush forests, no endless savannas. Instead, a sparse, scrubby landscape, resilient shrubs, drought-hardened grasses, mosses, low palms, and the occasional patch of edible herbs that probably tasted like sadness and bark. And yet they survived. Their teeth worn in shallow ridges suggest a grazing diet like horses or cows. Lots of low-growing plants. Coarse, dry, not exactly gourmet. Their molars, as you remember, were built for grinding rather than slicing, which rules out fruit or anything requiring dexterity. They weren't plucking apples from trees. More likely, they were pulling up clumps of bristly grass and slowly wearing them down over hours of methodical chewing. Historians still argue whether they were strict grazers or occasional browsers, switching between grass and shrubs depending on the season. But one thing is clear, their diet was limited by their trunk. A short, stiff trunk meant no stretching, no curling, no delicately picking through plants like a picky toddler. Whatever was easiest to reach was what went into the belly. You lean back and imagine a pygmy elephant at dawn standing on the edge of a rocky plain, head down, front knees slightly bent, chewing its way through a patch of dry moss like it was the only option left, and it probably was. There's something strangely noble in that. A kind of quiet persistence. You don't need to be a towering mammoth if you can make a life out of lichen. Here's a quirky tidbit. One recent study examined the isotopic composition of pygmy elephant teeth to figure out what they were really eating. Turns out their chemical signature shows a heavy reliance on C3 plants, typical of Mediterranean environments, but harder to digest than C4 grasses found in tropical savannas. So not only were they chewing rough stuff, they were doing it all day, every day for their whole lives. You think of all the gourmet options you have in your fridge right now, and suddenly feel a little guilty. Now let's add another layer, the dry season. Sardinia didn't always offer stable weather. Periods of drought meant water sources evaporated and plants grew brittle. What was already a tough salad bar became a battlefield. So what did the elephants do? They adapted. Slowly. Patiently. You imagine them traveling further for food. Revisiting old grazing patches. Digging into dry streambeds to find leftover moisture. Some might have even stripped bark from trees, pulling it down with those short trunks and gnawing through it like prehistoric beavers. There's evidence too of mineral-seeking behavior. Some bone sites are located near limestone outcrops, rich in calcium and salts. Elephants, like most herbivores, need minerals. Modern elephants travel miles for salt licks. So maybe the pygmy elephants had similar instincts. Maybe they knew where to go when the plants didn't cut it. You glance at the dusty trail in front of you. Faint prints again. Smaller than you'd expect. Leading down toward a shallow basin where the moonlight pools like silver soup. You imagine a mother and calf arriving here at night. They don't trumpet. They don't charge. They just lower their heads and begin chewing. A slow, rhythmic sound. Bite, grind, bite, grind. Not even for pleasure, just for survival. But it wasn't all struggle. Springtime brought bursts of growth. Small flowers, green grass, herbs that pushed through cracks in the stone. During those weeks, the elephants would have eaten better, gained weight, raised calves, celebrated in that unspoken animal way through fullness, through rest, through motion. One researcher speculates that this seasonal cycle, hard winters, generous springs, shaped their entire biology. Short legs for maneuvering steep hills, compact torsos for conserving heat, trunks reduced to conserve water loss through evaporation. Every part of them was designed to do just enough, never more. And that, in the end, may have been the problem. When things changed, when humans arrived, when droughts intensified, there was no more to give. No reserves. No plan B. You sit quietly imagining the last generation of pygmy elephants, scratching at dry soil with rounded feet, trying to coax one more meal from the ground. Maybe some made it longer than others. Maybe the strongest survived a little longer. But the food ran out slowly, and with it the future. Still the traces remain. Pollen embedded in fossilized dung, tooth enamel grooves shaped by root fibers, gnawed twigs found near ancient bedding sites. It's all there if you know how to look. A menu etched into silence. Let yourself relax now. Listen to the night around you, to the distant breeze over ghost hills, to the soft rustle of leaves. And imagine this somewhere out there in the deepest part of the past. A little elephant is still chewing, still pulling bark, still surviving one bite at a time. The moon's high now round and watching, and you're still here, walking through a dreamland stitched from memory bone and imagination. But tonight, you're not alone. You're surrounded by elephants again. A whole group of them. And not just walking or eating, they're living. You've wondered how they ate, how they walked, how they disappeared. But what about how they loved, how they parented, how they stayed together? Because even a tiny trunked elephant doesn't live alone. Welcome to the lost world of pygmy elephant social life. Less glamorous than Hollywood herds of thundering tuskers, but possibly more intimate. Smaller groups, quieter drama, big feelings packed into small packages. You settle into the grass near their imagined camp just outside a shallow grove, watching them as if the moonlight were a projector. There's a mother nudging her calf with a trunk that barely reaches its belly. The calf stumbles sideways and lets out a high-pitched squeak somewhere between a trumpet and a squeal. Nearby, another elephant, possibly the ant, flicks her ear and turns her back unimpressed. You smile. Historians still argue whether the Sardinian pygmy elephants kept the same tight family bonds as their larger cousins, but signs suggest yes. Bones found in clustered groups. Consistent sizes indicating related individuals dying near each other. It might have been mother, daughter, granddaughter generations, grazing together, teaching each other where the moss grows best. Unlike large herds of African elephants led by powerful matriarchs, pygmy herds were probably smaller, maybe 2 to 4 adults, plus calves. Think of it more like a dinner party than a festival. But within that smaller group, the emotional richness may have been just as deep. Elephants are famously empathetic. They mourn. They play. They communicate with touch, sound, and movement. So what did that look like when everything was compact? That's the fun of imagining. Short trunks would have meant closer proximity. To comfort a calf, you had to get really close. To greet another elephant, you'd have to lean in, touch heads, press shoulders. And here's something else sent. Modern elephants rely heavily on smell to identify one another, sense danger, and track family. With a shortened trunk, those olfactory signals may have been slightly muted. So maybe the pygmy elephants develop more tactile habits. More trunk-on-shoulder greetings. More rumbles and foot vibrations to stay in sync. Tiny gestures meaning everything. And don't forget parenting. Calves likely stayed with their mothers for years. They had to learn how to navigate steep Sardinian terrain, how to find water in dry months, how to survive on scrubby, stubborn vegetation. One wrong lesson could mean starvation. Imagine a calf trying to learn how to use its own mini trunk, watching mom fumble gently through the grass, mimicking her every move. Maybe it sneezes from the pollen. Maybe it falls nose first into a bush. Maybe the others watch and pretend not to laugh. That kind of learning isn't taught in school. It's passed through presence. You picture a juvenile taller, now growing confident. Not quite an adult. Not quite ready. It explores a little too far one day, curious about a ridge it hasn't climbed. The others call it back not with words but with vibrations through the ground. A warning. A reminder. It listens. Returns. That's not just instinct, that's culture. Some researchers believe that pygmy elephants might have developed slightly different vocal ranges due to their size, higher-pitched, more subtle calls than their large mainland relatives, more chirps and squeaks than booms, like a secret language in a smaller key. One paleontologist half-jokingly dubbed them the squeakers, imagining a herd softly singing to one another in trills and coos as they foraged. Cute, right, but plausible. And then there's play. Calves rolling in the dirt, chasing insects, slapping each other with tiny trunks. Even adult elephants engage in mock charges, tug-of-war games, and trunk wrestling. Now imagine that in miniature. A slow-motion sumo match with stubby trunks and exaggerated stances. You feel a laugh bubble up in your chest. It's strange, isn't it, that these creatures, long gone, mostly forgotten, still spark such warmth. You shift in the grass and watch as your dream herd settles down. They don't build nests, don't dig holes. They just fold their legs and lie in a circle, backs pressed against one another. A silent huddle of warmth and protection. Above them, the stars turn slowly. You wonder what fears they felt, if they were ever truly safe, if they worried when a calf coughed, if they felt the change in the wind the year before the last drought, if they sensed, as so many animals do, that their world was shrinking. Because even with all their adaptations, the pygmy elephants were vulnerable. They had no predators for most of their existence, but that made them unprepared when humans arrived. No defense mechanisms, no urgency, no reason to run, just trust and quiet, and the simple hope that tomorrow would be like yesterday. It wasn't, but tonight it is. So lean back now, let your head rest, let your mind nestle among a herd of slow, soft creatures who live their lives in loops of routine and affection. There's no need to speak, just listen. To the squeak of a calf's misstep, to the low thump of feet against dust, to the silence between heartbeats where all the memory lives. They may have vanished from the earth, but here under your moon they're still together. And so are you. The stars have shifted slightly. The air is thinner. You're still lying in the grass near your imaginary herd, but there's something new in the air now and unease, like the ground is preparing to speak. You sit up slowly, your eyes drawn to the silhouette of a distant ridge that shouldn't be glowing but is, because now we step into the fire. You follow the Sardinian pygmy elephant through its social life, its feeding habits, its family bonds. But no creature lives in a vacuum. And Sardinia, for all its quiet scrub and sleepy hills, wasn't always so peaceful. Underneath your feet, volcanic rock, not everywhere but enough to matter. Sardinia has a volcanic history, and though most of its fury slept during the pygmy elephant's time, the earth still shifted, trembled, cracked, and sometimes that was all it took. Historians still argue whether volcanic activity played a direct role in the extinction of the pygmy elephant, but the evidence is quite literally baked into the landscape. You walk now along a ridgeline where basalt pushes up like cooled frosting, the result of ancient eruptions. The ground is dark here, dense, quiet. And not far from this ridge, researchers have found layers of sediment that suggest something sudden ashfall landslide disruption. Imagine it, a small herd peeking through their usual forage. It's spring. The air smells of wet bark and wild herbs. The calf squeaks at a bug. Then the birds go silent. A low hum like thunder with no clouds. And then the ground shifts just a little. A rumble. A crack. The elephants freeze. Not because they understand, but because instinct does. Then ash. Maybe not a firestorm. Not a Pompeii. But enough to coat the leaves. To turn water sour. To blot out the stars for a night or two. Long enough to change the rhythm. One fringe theory posits that even minor eruptions in Sardinia's interior could have shifted migratory paths or contaminated critical water sources, especially for animals that return to the same places again and again. You follow a dry riverbed now, your feet kicking up fine gray powder. Volcanic ash. Still here after thousands of years. Silent but clinging. In one cave near the center of the island, sediment layers tell a story of alternating calm and chaos, plant-rich soils interrupted by sudden shifts in color and density, thin bands of clay, compressed organic matter, burned seeds. The elephant bones found just above these bands scarcer, more fragmented, as if the population had dropped, scattered or moved elsewhere fast. And even if the eruptions weren't deadly in a direct, dramatic way, they brought something equally dangerous: change. The post-eruption landscape would have been altered, vegetation patterns disrupted, grazing grounds scorched, waterways rerouted. For a species already walking a tightrope of survival, small, specialized, perfectly adapted to yesterday, these changes could have been devastating. You stop near a broad, flat stone cracked down the middle. One side is scorched, blackened. The other still rough and pale. You kneel and imagine an elephant hoof pressing here, pausing. Do they turn around? Keep going. You'll never know. And that's the trick, isn't it? Paleontology tells you what happened. Occasionally, when. But how it felt. That part's yours to imagine. So picture this: a family group half the size of what it was the year before. They forage with caution. They drink sparingly. They sleep closer together. And when a calf dies, not from ash or fire, but from hunger or confusion, they linger. The bones remain. Not buried, just forgotten. Later someone will find them. They'll brush off the dust, catalog the pieces, put them behind glass. But you were here first. You saw the moment in motion. And now the wind returns. Cool, heavy with mineral scent. You stand again, brushing ash from your palms, and turn toward a distant hill. Its outline looks oddly familiar. Then you realize it's a crater, worn, softened, but still there. A scar from the deep past. The kind of place you'd expect to find secrets. And maybe bones, maybe memories. You let yourself imagine one last eruption, not massive. Just enough to darken the sky and change the rules. Enough to push the last herd off its rhythm, off its path, into new territory where food is scarce and water unreliable. They try. They always try. But evolution doesn't give warnings, and nature doesn't negotiate. You sit once more, feeling the low thrum of earth beneath you, not dangerous now, just old, steady, reminding you that even the most solid ground can change. Even the safest home can betray. So you exhale, let the heat pass, let the ash settle, let the quiet return. The fire has ended, but its shadow lingers. The fire is behind you now, though the memory of it still clings to the back of your thoughts like soot. The landscape softens again. Rolling hills, low groves, tufts of wild grass, catching the moonlight. You could almost believe the elephants are safe again. Almost. But now comes the last, most familiar danger. One the elephants had never faced before. One they didn't evolve for. One with clever hands and very big plans. You walk quietly now, not because you're afraid, but because you feel like you're stepping into the final chapter of something. The sun is rising again, pale, hesitant, and as the light creeps over the horizon, it catches something man-made sharp edges, straight lines. A fence, a house, a fire pit. Humans have arrived. We've danced around it already, but here's where it becomes real. People. With tools and needs, and no idea what kind of story they were ending just by showing up. Historians still argue whether the first humans to reach Sardinia were Neolithic farmers or earlier Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. But one thing's certain, the moment humans arrived, the pygmy elephant's clock started ticking. Because people bring fire, and goats, and crops, and dogs, and all the little quiet things that chip away at a wild creature's world without even meaning to. You crouch near a rocky outcrop and find a flint shard, man-shaped, sharp, unmistakable, then another, then a pile of bones, split and charred, a molar cracked clean in half. It's not science fiction, it's lunch. You want to look away, but you don't, because extinction isn't a lightning strike. It's a slow erosion. And this, the hunting, the noise, the disruption, it didn't wipe the elephants out in a weekend. It happened over years, generations. At first, the elephants probably didn't even notice the people. Just another animal. A weird one, upright, loud, smelled like smoke and meat. But not dangerous, not at first. They kept grazing. They kept sleeping. They kept trusting. You find a footprint. Human. Next to an elephant's. Same direction. Same day. Maybe, here's a difficult thought, maybe the elephants didn't even run. Maybe they watched curious. Maybe they approached. Nudged the air with their stubby trunks. Offered no resistance. And then it was too late. You trace the edge of a cliff where paleontologists have found kill sites, bone fragments with tool marks, tusks split, joints removed, not out of cruelty, just necessity. Humans needed food, shelter, tools, and the pygmy elephant, small and slow and incredibly edible, was suddenly a perfect solution. A single elephant could feed a village for days. Its hide could be stripped for shelter. Its bones used as beams, bowls, spears. One was enough. But people don't stop at one. You sit beside an old fig tree roots curling into stone. And imagine a herd grazing nearby, now half its original size. No calves, just tired adults. They eat less, move less, return to fewer places. Paths grow over. Watering holes dry up. The humans aren't evil. They're surviving too. But they don't see the elephants disappearing. Not yet. Not until the forest is silent. And by then, it's just a memory. One researcher found an ancient carving etched into limestone, a crude image of what might be a trunked animal, scratched by someone's hand long after the last elephant had died. It's not beautiful, but it means someone remembered. Even then, there was mourning. A fringe theory suggests the final pygmy elephants may have lived longer in Sardinia's rugged interior, far from the coast and the first settlements, hidden in valleys, clinging to their rhythm, foraging in silence. Maybe they lasted a century longer than we think. Maybe they watched from the trees as humans built walls and ovens and altars. Maybe they waited for us to leave. We didn't. You stand again, brushing leaves from your hands, and gaze out over the hills. It looks peaceful now. But you know what's missing. You can feel it. No low rumble in the brush. No small, careful tracks in the dust. No presence heavy and soft and ancient. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a lesson. Because the pygmy elephants didn't go extinct from one single act. It wasn't the short trunk, or the bad teeth, or the ash. It was everything, a cascade, one pressure after another. Too much change, not enough time, and no one knew it was the last one until it was. So you breathe in slowly, hold it, then let it go. The humans are here now. The elephants are not, but you're here too. And that means the story can still be told, even if the ending is quiet, even if the voice is yours. You're walking through a museum again, but this one's a little dusty, a little disorganized. Less sleek glass and more cracked drawers, handwritten tags, bones in boxes labeled with question marks. Welcome to the backstage of paleontology, where the real drama lives. Because now we enter the chapter most people skip over: the messy, squabbling, human side of extinction science, misidentified bones, academic rivalries, petty notes in footnotes. Yes, folks, tonight we talk skeletal lies and scientific drama. You duck under a sagging rope barrier and find yourself staring at the center of it all, a pelvis. Not just any pelvis, a controversial pelvis. It's been argued over for decades. Some say it belonged to Mammuthus Lamarmorai. Others say it's from an entirely different species. One even claimed it was a malformed cow. And this isn't rare. In fact, it's almost tradition. See, when scientists first began digging around Sardinia in the 19th century, they were doing it in a world without carbon dating, without 3D scanning, without stratigraphy charts pinned to every cave wall. They were flying blind with hammers and monocles. So when bones came out of the ground isolated, weathered out of context, they had to guess. And guess they did. Some bones were declared mammoth, then redacted as bison. Others were hailed as dwarf hippos, then quietly relabeled in dusty corners of university basements. Historians still argue whether Mammuthus Lamarmorai deserves its own species status or if it's just a small version of another Mediterranean mammoth already known from Sicily. Some say it's distinct, based on dental patterns. Others argue the differences are too minor to matter. You stand in front of a display that shows 3 tusks, all roughly the same size. One is labeled Lamarmorai, one Ex Gerbeur meridionalis, and the third, simply unknown, Proboscidean. It's like a lineup where everyone looks guilty. And then there's the matter of bone storage. Sardinia's archaeological archives have, shall we say, gaps. Some of the first bones recovered by Father Manconi disappeared during monastery renovations. Others were taken to mainland Italy in the 1800s and never returned. A few ended up in private collections auctioned off as baby mammoth teeth to wealthy collectors with no idea what they had. One story, almost too ridiculous to believe, involves a researcher in the 1930s who reportedly used a pygmy elephant molar as a doorstop for 10 years before realizing it was a holotype specimen. He wrote a sheepish correction paper full of very polite Latin. You pass another dusty case, labeled Mammuthus Espes tentative. Inside a femur, a partial jaw, and a plaster reconstruction that looks more like a shrunken camel than an elephant. You can almost hear the arguments echoing off the walls. One paleontologist insists the bone curvature indicates island dwarfism. Another counters that it's just juvenile. A third says neither of them noticed the volcanic sediment fused to the tibia. You sit on a bench watching as a fictional symposium plays out in your mind. The professors wave diagrams. The students take furious notes. Someone brings up comparative foot structure. Someone else scoffs and storms out. You chuckle, because in a way, all this disagreement, this noise is a sign of love, of fascination. These bones still matter. They still stir something, even now. There's something deeply human about wanting to name, categorize, argue over a creature we'll never meet, to fight over who gets the story right, to be the last word in a sentence the animal didn't even know it was writing. And yet, through all the confusion, the real shape of the Sardinian pygmy elephant emerges. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but unmistakably. A skull found here, a tusk there, a single toe bone that fits just right. It's like building a mosaic with missing tiles, but you still see the image. One recent study used micro-CT scans of the elephant's molars to create a digital model of its bite mechanics. The researchers published a paper saying that, yes, Mammuthus Lamarmorai was a real, distinct functional species, and no, it was not just a shriveled-up teenager. Of course, 2 months later, another team published a rebuttal. You step into another room. This one more polished, modern. A sleek digital kiosk lets you rotate a hologram of the reconstructed elephant skull with your fingertip. You zoom in, look at the nasal ridge, that tiny trunk slot, and you feel it again. For all the pettiness, the mistakes, the misplaced bones, and mixed up labels, something survived. The shape survived. It's right there. Pressed in pixels, etched in stone, held in bone. You pause at the exit of the museum, turning back one last time. There's a box labeled Unclassified Fragments. Inside a rib, a tooth, a vertebra, no one can agree on. You smile, because the mystery isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Let the experts debate. Let the bones whisper. Let the story keep shifting. You'll keep walking alongside it, listening. It's late now. The world feels quieter, heavier, like it's wrapping itself in a blanket of dust and time. You step outside that squabbling museum of bones and into the realm of possibility science. No longer looking backward, but forward. Because of course, someone always asks, could we bring it back? And tonight you ask it too. You walk through a long field, dark and silver in the moonlight. The grass brushes your legs. The stars blink overhead. It's the kind of moment that invites a little fantasy. Maybe, just maybe, we could clone the Sardinian pygmy elephant. You pause. Because sure, the idea sounds wild, Jurassic Park without the raptors. But it's not completely science fiction anymore. Cloning has been attempted on extinct animals before. DNA has been extracted from a permafrost mammoths. Scientists have sequenced the genomes of long-dead horses, wolves, even Neanderthals. But the pygmy elephant, that's trickier. For one, DNA doesn't like warm climates. It degrades fast. Sardinia doesn't have permafrost. It has caves, dry ones, wet ones, limestone filters that preserve bones but not genes. So far, no usable DNA has been recovered from Mammuthus Lamarmorai fossils. But suppose that changes. Suppose, tucked deep in a cave, sealed beneath a rockfall, there's a fragment just enough, a tooth with viable genetic material. Not a full strand, but something we could piece together. Theoretically, you could use that to reconstruct part of its genome, fill the gaps with related species, say, Mammuthus primigenius, the woolly mammoth. You'd still need a surrogate mother. Probably an Asian elephant, the closest living relative. And you'd need a lab willing to spend millions and decades and endure a storm of bioethical controversy. Because that's the second part of the question. Should we even try? Historians, scientists, ethicists, and late-night philosophers still argue over that one. Some say yes, bringing back extinct animals could help restore damaged ecosystems. Others say No de-extinction is a distraction from protecting species we still have. Why clone a pygmy elephant when real ones are dying right now? You sit down beneath a cork tree and weigh it. Would it really be this elephant? Or just a copy of a copy genetically close, but missing the culture, the memory, the landscape? Because what makes an animal isn't just its DNA. It's its context. The land it walks, the trail it follows, the taste of plants it learned from its mother, the rhythm of migration, the specific way its family group trilled at dusk. You could build the body, but the soul that stays extinct, still the dream lingers. You picture it now, a pygmy elephant blinking in the fluorescent light of a sterile birth center. Its legs too wobbly, its ears twitching. A short trunk swaying in the air trying to find something to hold on to. And there's no mother, no herd, no one to teach it how to be what it's supposed to be. Would it feel out of place, confused, lonely, or would it imprint on us? Would we become its herd? There's a term for this in science: ecological ghosts. Creatures that have vanished, but whose absence still shapes the landscape. The Sardinian Pygmy elephant is one of them. It's no longer here, but its grazing patterns, its trails, its memory in the soil, all of that changed the island. Even now, Sardinian forests grow a little differently than they would have if the elephants were still nibbling at the edges. Bringing it back might not restore balance. It might just create a new kind of imbalance. You lie back now in the grass, eyes on the stars. Let the cool air settle into your bones. And you wonder, maybe the better way to honor the pygmy elephant isn't to recreate it in a lab. Maybe it's to remember it, to tell its story, to keep it real in the way only memory can. Because extinction isn't just about what's lost. It's about what we carry forward. The questions, the wonder, the stillness where a trumpet used to be. You imagine for just a moment one more elephant. Not real, not cloned, just a thought. Moving gently through the grass beside you. Small, silent, whole. You don't reach out. You just walk with it. Together, you're back at the cave again. The entrance is quiet, almost too quiet, like it's waiting for you. You step inside not because there's anything new to find, but because you feel like something's still whispering from deep into stone. Not words, just presence. Tonight the bones aren't scary, they're patient. You run your fingers along the rough wall, tracing where stalactites once grew like icicles of time. In the far corner, half buried in sediment, lies the curve of a tusk, short, cracked, but unmistakable. This is where it ends. Not with a bang, not with the last trumpet, but with slow forgetting, with bones left behind, with questions no one asked until centuries too late. But let's not call it tragic, because extinction is only final if the story ends. And here you are still listening, still wondering, still following the curve of that tiny trunk. You crouch beside a stone shelf, and your mind drifts back through everything you've seen. The strange footprints near a watering hole, the awkward little calf learning to chew moss, the bark-scraped trees, the trail that led through fire ash human camps and into silence. You were there for all of it. You watched the herd shrink, shift, disappear. And now the bones whisper not for resurrection, but for recognition. So what's left? A few scraps in museums, a line in a textbook, a debate in a dusty academic journal. A child's question, were they real? And your answer, yes, not just real. Remarkable, because this was a creature that shrank to survive, that kept its strange little trunk even when it stopped being useful, that passed down its quiet rituals for thousands of years, without ever once thinking it would be remembered. It didn't need to roar to matter. It didn't need to tower over trees to leave an impression. It just had to live, and it did. Slowly, carefully, entirely. You walk to the center of the cave. Kneel. Not to mourn. To witness. This isn't the moment of death. This is the moment of echo. You close your eyes and picture them not as fossils, not as failed experiments, but as they were. Wading through fog-thick mornings, scraping moss from rocks, singing to each other in high squeaky tones no human ever heard. You breathe in slowly, deeply. The cave smells like dust minerals memory. And then nothing. No last trumpet, no curtain call, just stillness. And that's where the story ends. Or rather, it ends with you. Because tonight the Sardinian Pygmy elephant lived again. Through your breath, your steps, your stillness. So hold on to it. Let it walk beside you a little longer. In quiet moments, in dreams, in footprints pressed gently into the softest parts of your imagination. So now we rest. Let the cave close behind you slowly. Let the air warm again as the memory fades, not because it's gone, but because you've carried it with you. Like ash tucked into your sleeve. Like the echo of a rumble in your chest. Breathe in, gently. There's no need to run anymore. No need to solve every mystery. Some stories were never meant to be finished, only followed. Like a trail of footprints that leads you somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Tonight you learn that survival isn't always loud. That sometimes the most enduring thing is silence. That a tiny trunk, barely useful, could still be enough. That presence doesn't need scale, it just needs time. And you gave it time. So feel your body soften now. Let your shoulders fall. Let your jaw loosen. The stars outside are still turning. The wind still rolls over ancient grass. And somewhere just beyond reach, a small elephant curls beneath the trees and sleeps. Not extinct, not forgotten, just resting. And so should you. Let your thoughts slow to match the rhythm of that breath. In, out, in, out. You've walked far tonight. You've remembered something that nearly slipped away. You've made space for a story that had no ending. Until now. Good night, traveler. You did well.